in about 4 minutes. So thank you for your patience and looking forward to the and we are going to begin the thank you all so much for joining us today as we discuss our 50-state survey of workforce development and career and technical education services in juvenile justice systems. Before we get started, I also want to let you know that on the phone with me we have Addie, the Director of Correctional Education at the U.S. Department of Education, who will be presenting later in this webinar. And any questions that you may have throughout the process, please put into the question and answer chat box, and we will respond to at the conclusion of the presentation. So we won't be answering questions as we go, but rather at the end, and we'll try to collect and answer as many questions as possible. So thank you all for joining, and we're going to get started now. For those of you who don't know, the Council of State Governments Justice Center is a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works across the country with all 3 branches of government to improve outcomes for those who come into contact with the juvenile and criminal justice systems. We provide technical assistance through a variety of different ways to states, local jurisdictions, nonprofit organizations. We do independent research into areas of emerging issues within the area, as well as host convenings, and try to meet the needs of the field wherever possible. A primary way that we provide technical assistance is through running the National Reentry Resource Center. The NRRC was founded in conjunction with the passage of the Second Chance Act to provide technical assistance to any state, jurisdiction, or organization that receives Second Chance Act funding. Over the last decade of running the NRC, we provided technical assistance to over 700 jurisdictions across the country in all 50 states as well as the territories of Guam. About 10% of that is under the juvenile justice through grants funded through OJJDP. But in addition to the technical assistance that's provided to the NRC, one of the primary missions is to identify trends and gaps in the field as a whole and respond to those as necessary to help move the field forward, which is what brings us to the work we were doing today. In 2015, we partnered with the Council of Juvenile Correctional Administrators to conduct a 50-state survey on educational outcomes for incarcerated youth in the juvenile justice system. We learned a lot about what was happening to the extent to which states weren't actually meeting constitutionally mandated gaps for their juvenile justice youth to match what was happening for youth in the community. But a small piece of that survey also touched on CTE and workforce development education provided to juvenile justice systems. And the lessons we learned, I apologize for sticking the head there. The lessons that we learned from that caused us to ask a few more questions about what CTE and workforce development look like in the juvenile justice system. We wanted to ask those questions because of what we were seeing in terms of outcomes. So nationally, approximately 50% of youth on probation and 65% of youth who return home from incarceration are rearrested within 1 year. Additionally, the population of youth who are in the juvenile justice system has continued to rise. In 1997, 62% of youth in facilities were 16 and older, and in 2015, that percentage had risen to 69%. Additionally, almost half of the youth placed on probation in 2016 were 16 and older. In really specific circumstances, we've seen that even higher. From work we've done with LA County, we know that in their facility, the actual average population is 17.9 years old. And then in many states across the country, the age of jurisdiction for juvenile justice systems is continuing to rise up to 22, 23 years old in some examples. So the needs of the juvenile justice population has continued to transition with that older population as more youth are not returning to traditional education or high school, but rather looking for workforce employment, living on their own. And we wanted to look at whether juvenile justice systems were ready to meet this new need and this new desire for work from the juvenile justice system. What we also saw is that states were asking these questions as well. So through our technical assistance, through conversations, states and localities were prioritizing college and career readiness as a growing need for skilled labor, especially for the young adult population. So for that population of 16 to 17-year-olds to 26, unemployment is significantly higher than for the rest of the population. And that while there were some successes of employment programs and pockets of success, overall it's something that states have really struggled with just generally, but especially for this justice-involved population. So given all of that information about the rising population, the need, and the desire for states to learn more about how to improve outcomes for this population, we once again partnered with the Council of Juvenile Correctional Administrators to conduct a follow-up 50-state survey on specifically targeting CTE and workforce development. We received responses from all 50 state juvenile correctional administrators and asked questions about service delivery and decision-making, partnerships with businesses, reentry and employment connections, and data collection and reporting. The survey was designed to answer 3 key questions about CTE and workforce development within the system. The first was what workforce development services are provided to incarcerated youth in facilities and when they return to the community, and how were those services integrated into case and reentry planning. We also asked what agencies juvenile justice systems are partnering with, including workforce development agencies, educational entities, and employers in order to promote career readiness and improve outcomes. And the third core focus area was around what data was collected and reported on workforce development outcomes, employment, and other youth workforce-related outcomes. So I'll now move into the findings from the survey that we found. And so the first survey finding that we found in response to the first question was that most incarcerated youth are not provided the workforce development services necessary to obtain viable employment in the community after release. One important note in response to the data that I forgot to mention during the methodology slide, when asking the survey, we asked whether states were providing services to some, none, or all youth in the facilities. That's not to say that all youth had to be taking CTE or workforce development services, but that they would have the opportunity to within their facility or in the community. When reporting on the data, we reported the state numbers as states that reported for all youth, because while we found through the survey and through speaking with experts a number of pockets or individual facilities or jurisdictions who may have been doing work that was effective, as a state, we felt it was necessary to report what was happening statewide due to justice by geography issues. So what we found was that states do not provide all youth and facilities with access to comprehensive CTE and workforce development services. As you can see in the chart, the different types of services had a variety of number of states who provided them. 27 states implied employability skills training, but this included resume building, interviewing, job searching, and application support. Only 26 states provided on-site or online CTE programs. Only 25 reported providing work-based hands-on learning, and only 20 states offered industry-recognized credentials. However, in addition to asking to what extent individual services were provided, we also wanted to look at how many states were providing a range of services to all youth. So that group of 4 was identified through conversations with experts in the field, such as advanced CTE and career tech, about what is necessary for a successful CTE or workforce development program. And it is that combination of soft skills, work-based hands-on learning, and the opportunity to earn credentials that are recognized by the industry. So when looking at how many states were providing the entire range of services to youth, what we found was that only 8 states actually offered all 4 of these services. So while the numbers might be higher for any individual state, only 8 states were offering the entire suite of services that ideally you would like to see in order to provide the best practice CTE and workforce development. Additionally, in terms of how the services were selected, states were primarily being driven by factors not tied to outcomes. So the primary factor that we found in the survey that was driving what sort of services were offered was staff availability, whether that was a staff member who had been trained or who had an interest, or any other number of factors within staff that was guiding what sort of services were being offered. The second most common was labor market trends, so looking what in the field was driving employment and trying to match services to that. But you can see that only 9 states were actually using outcome data, looking at how the services were effectively matching youth to employment and career readiness to determine what services to offer. Additionally, as mentioned, the majority of states were not looking at labor market growth as a primary driver for the selection and provision of services around CTE and workforce development. What we found is that only 15 states offered CTE courses in information technology and computer programming. And what we know, obviously, is that as the economy continually shifts, those are really critical skills. Additionally, only 9 states actually offered, 9 states did not offer any sort of computer or online access to programs. So youth in their facilities were getting no computer or online programming work. Additionally, 9 states were offering CTE courses to youth in culinary arts. While this isn't necessarily seen as a high wage or growth industry, it is an industry that a lot of juvenile justice and young adult criminal records can find success in terms of employment and see employment post-release, and so only see 9 states offer services in that was a little surprising. And then only 6 states offer CTE courses to all youth in building trades. Once again, this is a industry with high wages and a relatively low barrier to entry in terms of collateral consequences. We recognize that for many of the building trades, there were security concerns in terms of materials or off-site, but it was still a low number to see for a high-wage, low-entry workforce place. The second key finding we found was that most state juvenile correctional agencies lacked the partnerships needed to help incarcerated youth overcome barriers to obtaining viable employment in the community. One of the things we know when going into this process was that juvenile justice systems are not designed to be and are not workforce or CTE experts and should not be expected to be such. So in order to provide the best practice and best evidence-based CTE and workforce development programs needed to be partnered with workforce entities, educational entities, and employers to supplement their experience. What we found is that state juvenile correctional agencies lack diverse partnership with key workforce development and educational entities. While 39 states did have some level of partnership with community colleges, only 25 states had formal partnerships with technical and trade schools. And on the workforce side, only 27 states had any sort of formal relationships with employers, 17 states with state or local WIOA boards, and then even less for state and local chambers of commerce. And what we know is that it is necessary to have those connections in order to facilitate the sharing of resources in order to successfully provide these services to youth. So what we found was even when those partnerships did exist, similar to services, that there was often a lack of the diverse full range of partnerships. So while 39 states had partnerships with community colleges, only 30 states had partnerships with community colleges and community-based organizations, and only 20 states actually had partnerships with all of community college, community-based organizations, and employers. So while the top-line number of 39 states could be seen as a positive, the reality of only 20 states having all 3 partnerships makes it difficult to provide the range of services to all youth in the juvenile justice system, as it may be possible that a youth wants to go both to community college, but a separate youth also needs a connection with an employer, and if a state only has one of those connections, they're only able to provide those comprehensive services to one of those youth. Additionally, the lack of partnerships leads to a situation where juvenile justice agencies are not accessing all of the available funds to support CTE and workforce development services. So when we asked about what sort of funding streams were funding CTE and workforce development services, what we found is only 26 states reported utilizing Perkins grant funds to support CTE services, and only 11 states utilized WIOA funds. Given that both Perkins and WIOA have the ability to set aside for a justice-involved population, and my colleague Sean Addie will be talking about Perkins a little bit later, to see that just over only half of states were utilizing those funding and only 11 states were utilizing WIOA funding was a missed opportunity to help fund some of these critical services. Additionally, when looking at how states were funding beyond just federal grant services, but also with state funds, found that only 2 states were utilizing both state and federal grant funds in order to support CTE and workforce development services. And so it feels like there's a real missed opportunity and gap to funding these services appropriately to build that comprehensive network for youth in the juvenile justice system, and that can be traced directly back to the lack of connection to WIOA boards and state workforce boards in terms of accessing those funds. A quick note about Perkins, as Sean Addie will discuss later, is currently in the planning grant process for Perkins 5. The third key finding around data was that most states do not track key employment outcomes for incarcerated youth while they are in facilities or after their release. So what we know is generally if something isn't being tracked, isn't being looked at with quality assurance, it may be happening well, but chances are there are gaps in services and outcomes are not driving decision making. What we found was that within facilities, states were tracking a fair amount of data, but still missing some key measures. Only 37 states were actually tracking whether an industry-recognized credential or certificate was earned while in the facility. Only 17 states were officially tracking to what extent college, post-secondary degrees were earned while in facilities, and only 14 states collected on job training diplomas earned. And once again, only 8 states collected data on all 3 of these things for youth within facilities. And this is important because it impacts reentry and case planning. What we found through the survey was that generally there was no specific person or entity responsible for CTE and workforce development upon reentry, and often that work would fall to just a general reentry case planner or a probation or parole staff who had a variety of other tasks. And so if this data wasn't being tracked officially and reported, that reentry case planner or that probation or parole officer who is receiving just a case file and meeting youth at the end of their stay will not, unless the youth is telling them proactively, have knowledge of some of these criteria that have been worked on while in facilities, and thus will not be factoring it into the reentry case plan and ensuring the continuation of the work in the community. Also, while recognizing that tracking outcomes for youth back in the community is extremely difficult and something that states often struggle with, found that states generally were not collecting key youth outcomes after release. Only 17 states reported tracking whether a youth obtained employment. Only 14 of those states reported actually looking at whether a youth was able to maintain employment for a period of time. Only 8 tracked whether a training certificate or credential that had begun in a facility was completed in the community, and only 7 looked at internships or apprenticeships that were earned post in the community. So while we recognize that these are incredibly difficult data to track, it's also critically important to determining the success and which programs to offer in terms of both in the facility and the community. And it once again ties back into those partnerships of looking how can those connections be made to ensure that youth are completing their certificates if they begin the facility or are obtaining employment, and that the services that are provided are successful. So based off the survey findings and our discussions with leaders in the field, experts in CTE and workforce services, as well as state leadership to see where they saw successes within their states, as well as where they saw challenges, we identified a key set of recommendations. But first, we wanted to highlight just a couple of state jurisdictional examples on some practice that was happening that was best practice. Florida has legislatively passed what they called the CAPE Act, which actually requires CTE services be provided to youth in secure facilities and as part of the CAPE Act then tracks to what extent the CTE programming and certifications are earned in the community for up to 1 year as part of the formal process and resources under that CAPE Act. Additionally, which services are provided with CAPE funding is done in conjunction with the State Career Source Board to ensure that what certifications and industry recognized credentials are being provided, A, match what employers are looking for, and B, match what the growth industries in Florida are, to ensure that what's happening in facilities is matching what's in the community in terms of need, in terms of availability, and then they're providing for the follow-up to ensure that the work being done in facilities is encouraged and continued upon return to the community wherever possible. Similarly, Georgia has established a robust partnership with technical and trade schools. Specifically, they identified one specific facility within their state where youth who have already achieved a GED or a high school diploma and are interested in CTE and workforce development are able to transfer to that facility. And that facility has a robust partnership with those technical and trade schools to allow those youth off-site to build hands-on learning through CTE work. They go on the weekends so that students at the schools that would normally be attending are not there to alleviate safety concerns and provide for protection. And this allows for the building of hands-on work-based learning opportunities that the facility would not be able to provide. These are just two examples of some key identified best practice for providing robust workforce development services that leads to long-term employability and improved outcomes. Some other key practices that were identified through this process was designating specific TAC to oversee the formulation and implementation of workforce development services. So we often saw that in states, there was no one entity or responsibility for ensuring that CTE and workforce development services within facilities in the community were robust, was providing quality assurance on those programmings, that it was meeting those needs. And without having an identified staff person, whether that's regionally within a facility or statewide, that work will likely continue to not be done. Additionally, it is key that soft skills trainings are offered as part of any CTE and workforce development service. This includes interviewing skills, resume building, conflict resolution, as well as support in completing financial aid and college applications for ongoing studies. But without that support for soft skill development, we know that these services will often not be successful. Additionally, as mentioned, having access to on-site and on hands-on learning opportunities is critical for success, as well as linking youth specifically with paid training, apprenticeships, and opportunities and ongoing support upon release and completion of a training program in order to support engagement and employability. As mentioned, we don't expect for juvenile justice systems to be workforce development experts, and as such, it is crucial that they develop partnerships with key agencies. Those agencies include community college and trade schools, sending representatives to WIOA board meetings, building a relationship with state, local, and chambers of commerce, and attending workforce development boards to make sure that as an agency, that juvenile justice agencies are acting as the voice for their population in these meetings to divert resources and provide the resources and support necessary to youth in the community. Additionally, some practices that might be beneficial is establishing a resource map or registry guide of available workforce development services in the community to provide to youth upon reentry. Also, partnering around expungement and case closure, especially for a juvenile justice population, is really helpful in helping youth understand what they do and do not need to list on employment applications and college applications in terms of a criminal history, and can help them navigate the many difficulties of collateral consequences in gaining employment. And lastly, some key best practices around collecting and utilizing outcome data. It is critical for states to identify a key set of workforce development performance measures that are tracked both within facilities and upon reentry into the community. Some of these key measures are attendance and participation in workforce development programs, specifically in the community, CTE credits and industry credentials and certifications earned, and employment and obtainment and maintainment, and whether employment was maintained post the completion of the program. While we recognize once again that these are difficult data to collect, partnerships with workforce development entities and educational entities can help share that data back without having to directly get that information through surveys or learning from the youth themselves. Some additional best practice around using outcomes is looking at analyzed data by demographics, facility, and crucially by service provision. So not just looking at whether youth leaving a specific facility are obtaining employment, but whether the specific courses that they did take or certifications that they were able to earn was leading to employment better than another service that may be offered at that facility. Also, it is critically important as part of building those relationships to share these data with key partners such as workforce development boards, WIOA boards, as well as governors, legislators, and statewide agencies in order to support the need for additional resources and partnership to improve outcomes for this population. I'll now turn it over to my colleague Sean Addie to discuss Perkins 5 and the opportunity it provides for this population.
Thank you, Jacob. Hi, my name is Sean Addie, and I'm here from the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education, to talk with you all about some of the efforts that we are making to support education and employment for justice-involved youth and young adults. You can see our vision for education is to expand opportunities for every student, including incarcerated learners, so that they can explore, choose, and follow vertically integrated career pathways to earn credentials of value and enter or re-enter the workforce. We're encouraged by the Justice Center's work and interesting findings that this report contained, and it's very informative as we all think about how we can best support education and employment for individuals who are involved in the juvenile justice system. One of the ways that we're doing this at the department is by funding career and technical education. The Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act, known colloquially as Perkins 5, was signed into law by President Trump on July 31st, 2018. This bipartisan measure reauthorized the Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Act of 2006, known as Perkins 4, and continued Congress's commitment to provide nearly $1.3 billion annually for career and technical education programs for our nation's youth and adults. Perkins 5 represents an important opportunity to expand opportunities for every student to explore, choose, and follow career and technical education programs of study and career pathways to earn credentials of value. You can see here some of the changes in Perkins 5 with the 2% set aside for supporting CTE in a correctional setting. So this recent reauthorization of Perkins includes a doubling of support for correctional education. In Perkins 4, it was 1% of CTE funds could be used for correctional education. Now in Perkins 5, it's 2%. It also expanded programs that could be served with Perkins money to include specifically juvenile justice facilities. And it makes assurances that the services offered in state correctional institutions and juvenile justice facilities include high-quality career and technical education programs and programs of study. So now, I think we lost the slide, but that's quite all right. The Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education has also funded discretionary grant programs that seek to help individuals in the juvenile justice system obtain education and employment. The Juvenile Justice Reentry Education Program is an innovative program that provides career and technical education programs in juvenile justice facilities, along with comprehensive post-release career technical education and training, as well as wraparound reentry supports and services. In 2016, the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education made grant awards to 4 sites, which are implementing CTE programs for youth and young adults within various confinement settings. These CTE programs build on the existing efforts to improve reentry outcomes for youth who've been in the justice system, with a focus on building strong partnerships to implement a comprehensive and collaborative approach to improving education, employment, and other positive outcomes for justice-involved youth and young adults. You can see here the 4 programs are Portland Community College in Oregon, St. Paul Public Schools in Minnesota, the School District of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania, and Shelby County Public Schools in Memphis, Tennessee. You can read more about each of the grantees using the link provided on the previous slide. I believe these slides will be mailed out and the webinar will be archived. And the target population of these programs reflects the vast differences in juvenile justice systems across the country. For example, the Philadelphia School District is working with youth after they've been arrested and detained, but prior to sentencing. That requires their CTE programs to be short in duration, broadly accessible to youth with different educational backgrounds, and stackable credentials that can be completed after release as well. Portland Community College is working with recently released youth returning to Multnomah County, which is where Portland is located, who are under probation or county supervision. They deliver much of their programming at the college campus as part of a cohort model that gives youth both classroom preparation and practical work-based learning in a variety of in-demand occupations in the Portland region. Another program I'm going to tell you about is the Young Adult Diversion Project. In 2017, the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education, in partnership with the U.S. Department of Justice, funded a 3-year technical assistance initiative that's helping 16 state and local partnerships provide their justice-involved young adult population with alternatives to prosecution and or incarceration, including special education, career and technical education, and other workforce development opportunities. These partnerships are located in 13 states, as you can see here on the map: Alabama, California, Florida, Kentucky, Massachusetts, Michigan, Mississippi, Nevada, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Pennsylvania, and Utah. And then another program that the department's operating to provide support for incarcerated juveniles and adults is the Second Chance Pell Experimental Sites Initiative, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. This pilot began in 2015 and was expanded by Secretary DeVos in 2019, and is providing need-based Pell Grants to people in state and federal prisons. The goals of this initiative are to test the effectiveness of providing more flexibility with student aid provisions and to test whether changes to the financial aid process increase access to high-quality educational opportunities for incarcerated individuals and lead to improved academic and life outcomes. A recent administration action expanded the Second Chance Pell Pilot Program and invited new schools to apply to participate. It's just an example of how education for incarcerated individuals is a top priority of this administration. So thank you for the time, but that's just a little bit of an example of how the Department of Education is also working to support education leading to employment for justice-involved youth and young adults. I'll turn it back to you, Jacob.
Thank you so much, Sean. As you can see, we took all of the lessons learned and best practice and evidence-based practice and put from the survey and are publishing a brief, which is actually officially launching today. You can find it at the link provided within this presentation, called On Track. The brief highlights all of the lessons learned from the survey, provides some additional data that we weren't able to cover through the webinar today, as well as some more examples of best practice that states can look at, whether they're either utilizing themselves or, if possible, as a guidepost for potential opportunities for improvement, and includes key links to resources around best practice, CTE, and workforce development, and other support services. So please do check out that brief. It is being released today. As Sean said, we'll be sending out the presentation, and this is being archived, so you'll be able to find the link there as well. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation. We will now turn to any questions that we have. We've gotten a few so far, but if you have any additional questions, do please put that into the question and answer text box, and we will get to as many as possible. The first question we got was around which states were providing all four service components, as well as how they were providing on-site work experience for students who couldn't leave the facility. To answer the first half of that question, unfortunately, because of the nature of the information and how it was collected through the survey, we can't highlight individual states either positively or negatively. We promise to just report on the aggregate. However, in terms of how those services are provided on site, there's a variety of strategies. Some facilities have workshops, welding studios, culinary kitchens on site that they're able to utilize for these services. Additionally, there's a number of virtual reality-based CTE and workforce development programs around welding. There's actually a new partnership between Google and Arizona State University that allows for some virtual reality lab work to do work in health fields and work towards industry-recognized credentials in a distance-based manner in that sense as well. So that allows for students to practice hands-on with machinery, even within the facility, even if there may not be the space or resources for an entire shop or welding equipment or allowing youth off the facility. We got a second question about what is considered justice involved. For the purposes of this brief, we were looking at youth who were held in long-term state-run facilities in terms of what counted as a facility. But for justice involvement, it would be any youth who is either in a facility or under community supervision. And then, as you saw within some of the data, tracking youth upon reentry, many of which are also under community supervision upon reentry into the community. Let's see. Sean, did you have anything to add to that first point about how sites can provide on-site work experience to students in the facility?
No, I did not. I think you covered it well.
Great. Another question was whether there was any evidence-based, cognitive-based intervention or CBI training curriculums, specifically workforce-focused for juveniles while incarcerated. Well, we wouldn't be aware of any cognitive-based interventions that are based around employment. Combining the two is something that we have seen work effectively in facilities and in practice, where a CBT-based therapy could also include some of that soft skill development around employability, resume training, interview training, and be done consecutively and wrapped within each other. That is where the best evidence for CTE services is to be incorporated into education, into other treatment modalities. Additionally, there are examples of some jurisdictions or organizations that utilize cognitive behavioral response within a workforce training program. So ROCA, based out of Massachusetts, would be an example of an organization that utilizes both services, and can look to them. I think they list some of their outcomes on their website that could be helpful as well. Sean, did you have anything to add about what you've heard?
I did not.
Great. Another question we received was, how can remote facilities form better partnerships? This is something that I see states struggle a fair amount with, especially states with larger geographic areas where facilities may be geographically far from any sort of urban or employment center. Work in North Dakota and Alaska. And it's certainly a challenge, and there are a few different strategies that can be employed. One is through distance-based trainings, utilizing available technology. So in the case of Alaska, their juvenile justice system and the mental health system actually collaborated and pooled resources to put in Skype and distance-based support for many of their more far-flung regions to allow for trainings and communication to happen across the vast geographic state. Additionally, by forming partnerships at the state level, it allows local facilities to access those resources and that knowledge between state-level agencies. So if the state agency is partnering with WIOA boards, it can help support and getting resources and information to those local facilities. And lastly, thinking about if the local economy maybe doesn't have a number of employers to partner with, what sort of services and CTE courses can be utilized in a remote way by the students. So prioritizing things like information technology or coding or graphic design that maybe the students, upon reentry to the community, will be able to get jobs in regions that are remote and will do that work remotely as well, and prioritizing those CTE services over maybe employability skills that don't match the local employers in the region. For another question we received was, for the use of WIOA funding, are there examples of how the WIOA outcomes have been effectively met with this population? Sean, I don't know if that's something that you maybe have a little bit of insight on.
So I do not, because that WIOA program, the WIOA youth program, is run out of the Department of Labor. So I would have to look over there. Our office primarily works on adult education. But I would add, actually, Jacob, to your question earlier about remote facilities, I think it's also important to look and see what other similarly situated states are doing, because I'm sure there are, you're not the only one to run into that problem of having, remote facilities. I'm sure there are other states you can talk with and see what they've done to surmount those challenges. And
to plug the brief as well, some of those strategies are outlined in the brief in terms of best practice that some jurisdictions were handling well, and so turning to that brief to try to find what may work for your state or your local facility. To answer the WIOA question, that is something that came up during some of our discussions with state leaders. It was mentioned that WIOA requirements have a requirement that it serves 75% of youth who are not in education currently, or who are out of school, and that for some of the remote facilities in the state we were discussing it with, it was hard for their local, even though they actually had a good relationship with their local WIOA representative, to be able to meet that 75% match with the youth in their facility, because most of them were still in some sort of school program, and so then weren't meeting that 75%. And so what they found in order to meet some of that criteria was, to really help their WIOA representative by identifying those students who had completed a GED or a high school diploma, but also making that linkage upon reentry to the community to allow that continued access to support. So even if they maybe couldn't receive the support in the facility, they had that link and resources available to them in the community and were aware of it and what that could offer them. One last question that we've received is around whether there have been thoughts of entrepreneur programs for those youth who are showing good behavior and have lesser crimes, possibly having guest speakers and teaching them about how to create an idea and taking that idea into production, promotion, etc. Well, I can't say that we heard of a specific entrepreneur program along those lines. One thing that was exciting about this process is even over the course of the year that we were conducting this survey and pulling together responses and talking to experts in the field, was that this is something that there's a lot of excitement about, that jurisdictions and individual facilities and states are recognizing the need and continuously trying to find ways to better meet the needs of this community, trying new pilot programs, working to see if they can get youth off facilities into work-based programs, and that there's actually a lot of interest and partnership from the employer community in supporting this population. From Home Depot to Google, there are a number of entities who are trying to develop online-based programs that are looking to fund and partner and provide programs and support. And that's something that we really saw throughout this process and across the country, that there's a real opportunity that's been recognized that this is a topic of interest and of need, and a lot of people are coming to the table to try to improve outcomes for this population on this field. So I don't think that directly answers that question, but I do want to highlight that this is a really exciting time, and that if you are a representative of a justice agency, to reach out and find those partners that employers are looking to partner and support, both locally and large-scale multi-state and multinational corporations who are looking to be involved and support this population and find ways to improve outcomes. Great. Well, that actually wraps up the number of questions that we've had submitted. If anyone else would like to quickly submit a question, we would be happy to answer it. But if not, never mind, got one more question in. Is there a national organization or association for educators specifically working in juvenile justice facilities so that we can network and collaborate in problem solving? So yes, so the Correctional Education Administrator, CEA is the acronym. Correctional Education Association, I apologize for misspeaking, handles, it crosses both adult and juvenile in terms of its membership, but that is, the CEA does exist. They host 2 conferences annually, as well as have regional meetings and support. We actually spoke at the recent CEA conference in Detroit this past summer on some of these findings, and would highly encourage you, if you are a juvenile justice educator, to reach out. They actually have a juvenile justice work group within CEA to facilitate lessons learned and best practice and collaborate in problem solving. Sean, are you aware of any other organizations?
That's what I was going to reference.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining this webinar. We hope that you found it enlightening. For additional information, please check out the brief on our website. I can go back to that slide so you can see that link one more time, as well as sign up for our newsletter, look at both OCTAE's website as well as CSG's. And please reach out if you have any individual follow-up questions. You can see my email on this slide. But once again, appreciate everyone for tuning in today, and have a wonderful rest of your day.